I just want you to know, no one was hurt too bad in, in that video. So what a fun time that was. I did get hit. Brian hit me with this forearm right here. So anyway, I know. That's why I'm like this today. Anyway, today we're talking about relationships, and we have dedicated this whole month to talk about relationships, and because we know you all have them, and they're tough. Relationships are just hard. And last week we talked about communication, and unless we get communication down, we're going to do what we're going to talk about today, and that is conflict. Our conversations we have with people and how we talk and what we share can lead to conflict. And so last week we talked about, if you weren't here last week, we talked about communication, how to communicate. And so this week we're going to talk about conflict. And so Gail and I thought we'd put this to practice last night, so we had a conflict. And you know, it was all about our conversation. I had shared some stuff with her, and she misunderstood me. You know, I'm like, you should know what's in my head. You should know what I'm thinking. And so there was a little bit of conflict. It wasn't much, and so we resolved it. You know, we've been married long enough. We're like, we're not fighting anymore. It's not worth it. So anyway, we're going to talk about how to resolve conflict today, and it takes some work. Relationships take some work. You got to put things together. It takes some assembly is required in relationships. Kind of like, have you ever put those IKEA dressers or whatever together, or the solder stuff, and you open it up, and here's all these pieces and parts, and the directions are a little like, okay, obviously these engineers didn't put this together. And so it's just interesting of the work that has to be done. And so I want you to listen to this statement. It's not if you will have conflict in relationships. It's when you have conflict, and how you'll deal with it matters. And it matters. How we deal with conflict really matters. And so, you know, when we hear conflict, many times our minds go to those relationships that are on fire. They just are bad. They're just not good. But we have to also remember about the conflicts that we may have that's maybe in our marriages, or maybe just in a friendship or whatever, because these same things apply. Because there's conflict, and we need to deal with them. And I can remember when I was about, I don't know, 7 or 8, and my parents set me down and they said, Byron, as you grow, you're going to have conflict in relationships. So we want to teach you how to deal with conflict. I'm totally making that up. That didn't happen. Matter of fact, many of us have never been taught how to resolve conflict. I mean, you may be 30, 40, 50, whatever it is, and thought, you know what, I've never been taught. I've just never been taught how to deal with conflict. And one thing they said, have you heard this? Time heals everything. That's not true. It's just not true. And so especially in conflict, matter of fact, time makes it worse. And, you know, if you had a wound in your arm and you thought, well, time will heal it, you know, it's going to get infected. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. And so it's just like conflict that we need to deal with, because there's anger in conflict, and a lot of times that anger turns to resentment, and resentment turns into bitterness. And bitterness just grows and grows. Matter of fact, the Bible talks a lot about this. See, when we're bitter, we become this poisonous well. And what happens is people begin to drink out of that well, meaning our friends and people around us will take on our offense. They will begin to be poisonous too. And Hebrews talks about how this becomes poison. It says, see to that no one falls short of the grace of God, and no one, listen to this, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. He's saying that when there's bitterness, it can defile other people if we don't deal with it. And so there's even a story in the Bible about Herod's wife, and she gets all upset at John the Baptist, and she gets bitter. She gets bitter, and she's so bitter and doesn't deal with it. It led to John the Baptist's beheading. That's what bitterness can do. It can lead us to some things that are just unbelievable. And so the power of unresolved conflict, it just messes with our emotions. It just can control us if we don't resolve it. And so unresolved conflict can just mess our lives. It can eliminate the joy that we have in life. And, 'cause a lot of times we're on edge. We're touchy, we're sad, we're grieving perhaps. Perhaps we're embarrassed of how we acted or reacted. And so, it can affect our self-esteem of how we feel about ourselves. It can even just leave us disappointed and wanting that relationship to be healed. And so it can just really mess with us a lot. And it's just an emotional roller coaster many times. And not only that, but it can block your relationship with God. It can interfere with your prayers. It is that powerful of what unresolved conflict can do, and it just keeps growing and growing. And so, some people have conflict that's never been resolved that is so big now that they can't hardly go back. They've allowed all kinds of stuff. Matter of fact, sometimes I like to watch on YouTube these court cases, and I was watching one the other day, and this guy, he was just like he was not even repentant about what he had did, and they asked him why he did what he did, and he said, because of how I was being treated. And I thought, there it is. That bitterness just kept growing and growing, and it got to the point where he couldn't even come back from it. And so, it takes a lot of courage to resolve conflict. A lot of courage. Having those hard conversations is hard. It takes a lot of courage. Matter of fact, most of my life, I've not been good at this. I've not been good at having those hard conversations. I'm getting better. And what I'm finding out is when I deal with those unresolved conflicts and have those hard conversations, it's so good. And yet there's still this fear sometimes to have those hard conversations. But it just takes a lot of courage. It might be one of the most courageous things you ever do, to have a hard conversation. And especially those ones you've ignored for a long time, and to go to that person and have that talk. Maybe it's in your marriage. Maybe it's with your children. Maybe it's with your neighbor. Maybe it's with a coworker, an employee, a boss. Whatever it is that you've just let go for a long time. And it just takes a lot of courage, especially to be that one that went and led this conversation to resolve conflict. And how do we do that? How do we have that courage to be able to do something that's so hard? Well, it's through God only. It's God's strength. Matter of fact, in 2 Timothy, he says, God has not given you a spirit of fear and timidity, but of a power and love and a sound mind and discipline. That's what God has given us. So the only way we can have this kind of courage is through Him, as He fills us with His power and His love. Can we have those hard conversations? Let the Spirit of God just fill us to be able to do something. And so, with all that said, let us talk about it, and let us not burrito around the bush. I promise the last time I'll say that. I promise. I promise. I promise. All right, so let's talk about how do we resolve this. What's some things we can do? And there's a passage in the book of James that I think is so good that if we can look at this passage and pull out some stuff, that it will help us so much. And that passage is James 1, 19 through 20. It says, understand this. And here's James going, understanding that most people have not been taught how to resolve conflict. And he says, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. So he says, listen, you have to understand this. He says there's one quick and there's two slows. Remember grandma or mom used to say, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you listen more than you talk. And so this is exactly what James is talking about. And so you think, okay, listen. Listen to what? What am I supposed to listen to? Well, some things you should listen to is just listen to their feelings. Listen to their thoughts. Listen to their hurts. You may be surprised when you listen of what you're going to hear, of whether it's right or wrong. You're going to hear what they have to say, and that's why James says, be quick to listen. Before you say anything, be quick to listen. Now, what you shouldn't be listening for is what you're going to say next. A lot of times we don't listen to what they're saying. We're trying to think of what I'm going to say. How am I going to justify what they're talking about? How am I going to tell them that they were wrong in their thinking? No, we listen. Listen to what they have to say. See, when conflict arises, don't just fight. We have to fight fair. It may be what you consider a fight, maybe not a punching, drag-out fight, but there's a fight that goes on in the midst of that. But we need to fight fair. We need to fight this conflict fair. And so what does it look like to fight fair and resolve conflict in a way that honors God? What does that look like? Well, I think the first thing is, first of all, using his power. But I think that one of the first things is that we're the first to move forward. That's how you fight fair. We make the first move. Matter of fact, it must be important because it's what Jesus said in Matthew 5:23 and 24. It says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. It's so interesting. It's like Jesus is saying, hey, listen, if you got unresolved conflict, go take care of that before you even come to me. Whew. That's how big of a deal it is. It's like he understands that if you come with conflict, there's going to be stuff between you and him. He goes, listen, go. Before you bring anything to me, go and resolve this. So fighting fair is for us to go first. I think fighting fair is to own your part of it. We have to own what we need to own. Matter of fact, you need to own what you need to own, but don't own what you shouldn't own. Now, what I mean by that is I've had times where I owned way more than I should have. Way more. And so it never really resolved the conflict. But we need to own what we need to own if we're going to fight fair. And another one is to keep them in mind. To fight fair is to keep them in mind. Matter of fact, Philippians says, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the other. Now listen to this. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. In our relationships, that's how we should do this. That we put them first. When we have the attitude of Christ. When we are to be like Christ. And so, what the goal should be is to fix the problem, not the person. Our conflict, resolving it is not to fix that person. That we begin to point it at them, and you're this, and you're that, and you did this. No, let's fix this problem. What is the problem? Quick to listen. Understand before trying to be understood. That's a good thought. I want you to listen to this statement. Everything everyone does makes sense to them. Everything everyone does makes sense to them. It may not make sense to you. They may do something and you're like, they are off the rocker. And maybe they are, but to them it made sense. And there's this conflict because they did something or said something, and it made total sense to them, but not to us. And you know what? We do things that do not make sense to others. And so that's this conflict that's going on inside of us. And the first thing you got to know is I can't be quick to listen if this thing's open. This big mouth has to shut up for me to listen. It just has to happen like that. Proverbs 18:2 says, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion." He says it's a fool. It's a fool. Matter of fact, you read Proverbs, and there's a lot of, you're a fool if you do this. And so if we just don't understand and want to understand, and we're giving our opinion all the time, the Proverb says that we're a fool. Slow to listen, quick to speak, and quick to be angry is how we usually do it. We usually get it backwards. We're really slow. We'll listen for a short time, and we're quick to speak and say our opinion and justify, and then quick to be angry. Is usually how it goes. And Proverbs 18:13 says, "If one gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame." Again, we need to listen, slow to listen, or fast to listen, and then slow to speak. Is the way that we need to do this so that we can resolve conflict. So let's go to the next one. Slow to speak. Slow to speak. Slow your words down. I remember when I first turned my feet to Christ, I did it in a Methodist church out in the country. It's a really small church. And there was a guy there that every time you talked to him, he talked after he thought. He would stop, you'd ask him a question, and he would go. And then he'd give his answer. Matter of fact, there were sometimes I'm like going, but he always did do that. He was slow to talk. He slowed his speech down because his response, he wanted to be good. And so you see here that we're to slow down our words. Proverbs says, "Those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity." So a good thought is should this be said? Should what I'm about to say, should it even be said? The only way we can do that is if we slow it down. Or another one is, should it be said now? Because there are some things that probably should be said, but being said at the right time is important. It's a big deal. This might not be the right time, but this is. So when we're slowing our speech down and we're thinking about our words, listen, here's some things to think about. No name calling. No calling them this and that. No finger pointing. Don't raise your voice. That could be hard, but that voice level means everything. Don't get historical. I didn't say hysterical. Historical, what I mean by is don't dig up the past. Don't dig up the past. I had some people that I was in conflict with. I went over to their house. I sat down with them, and they started out by talking about something I did years and years and years ago. First thing I thought is, why have you never told me that? But they first started this whole conversation of resolving this conflict by digging up a bunch of stuff in the past. That's not going to get you anywhere. Don't say never or always. Those are terrible. Those are defensive words, because first of all, what you do is you don't do it always, or you never do that. Those are things that just don't happen in a relationship. They don't do that always. And so when you use those words, those are fighting words. And here's a big one. Do not put it on Facebook. Oh, isn't that terrible? I mean, they want to resolve conflict on Facebook. That's just not going to happen. And another one is to tell the truth in love. In love. Tell the truth in love. Matter of fact, Proverbs 12 says, "The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." Our words are very, very powerful. And we can tell the truth as long as it's done in love. And so go back. Here's where we're at so far. We're quick to listen. James says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and then he says, and slow to anger. Slow to anger. And then he reminds us that human anger does not produce the righteousness of God. So that in our anger, we're not acting like we're a follower. It's not producing the righteousness of God. Our lives are to reflect God. And he's saying that anger will not do that. So slow to anger, handle your anger righteously. Ephesians says, in your anger, do not sin, meaning there must be anger, which, to say don't be angry is like, wow. But he says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Now, what this is saying when you look at this word foothold is saying, do not give the devil an opportunity through your anger. Don't be angry in a way that gives the devil a foothold. Maybe it's just ruining your witness to somebody. He says, don't let the devil have a foothold on you. Don't let him get a grasp on you. The other thing in that passage that's interesting is it says, do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. I mean, what if this starts at 11:45? You have 15 minutes. Now, what he's talking about is he's not talking about necessarily a time. He's talking about just don't let it be to go very long unresolved. Don't let it linger. Deal with it quickly is what we need to do, because the scripture tells me that the devil prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. I'll tell you, he would love to devour your marriage, and he's doing it all over the place. He would love to devour your friendships and cause you to be upset with one another. And it says the Bible tells me to be on guard constantly. The Bible tells me that the devil come to kill, steal, and destroy. And so we have to be aware, and this is why we need to be slow. Slow to speak and slow to be angry. And again, it's not anger that's a sin. It's how you handle the anger. It's what comes out of that anger. There's a righteous anger. And I've never really went in and studied that, but I'm sure it's incredible. There's times where you need to stand up for things that are right in a good way. There's a righteous. I mean, Jesus went into the temple and he kicked over tables and said, "Man, you have turned this temple into a den of thieves." It was righteous anger. But how we handle that is so important, because there's also human anger that the scripture talked about that doesn't bring glory to God. And this is uncontrolled anger, when we're just out of control. Righteous anger, we're in control. We're maybe being firm, but we're in control. And so Paul says, don't let anger set and be unresolved. And so Romans 12:17-18 says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, what he's talking about is he's talking about our witness in front of people. He's talking about how we respond to this stuff. That he says, be careful of what you do and let it be right in the eyes of those around you. And he says something interesting. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live in peace with everyone. I want you to notice he didn't just say live in peace with everyone. He says as far as it depends on you. Do you know that there's some people you just can't live in peace with? It just can't happen. And you just have to remove yourself from them. You just have to remove yourself from them. Now, be careful how you handle that, but there's just some people that no matter what you do, you can't live at peace with them. He says as much as possible. As much as possible. So with all that said, I know that was a lot. If you go just back up to that scripture in James, and you start there. If we just would do that, if we would just get that down, I think that's going to be a lot. But let me end with this. So many times when we think of God, we think of comfort, which I'm not saying that's wrong, because that it is true. But a lot of times our mind goes there, and so that means the opposite, that when we think of the devil, we think of conflict, which again is probably true. But the problem with those two thoughts are possibly God is not freaking out about your conflict. Possibly, I believe the devil sometimes wants us to get so comfortable that we don't think we need God. I think he does that. Now, this sounds like the opposite of what we would think he would do, but sometimes I think if he can get you so comfortable in your life that you really don't need God, like, man, this is pretty easy. I can do this. And so our need for God gets smaller and smaller. Possibly, God is using your conflict to get you to a point to fall to your knees and go, God, I need you. God, I have to have you at this time. As we talked about before, it's the Spirit of God. So just maybe, God is using, I don't say God has made it happen because I don't think he does that, but I think he might be using this conflict in our lives so that we would just realize our need for him. Because it is. It's very, very true. So this series to me is about us taking ownership. We can do this whole series and keep thinking of other people and they need to do this. I don't think that's what this series is about. I think this series is going, I have to own this. This is not an elbow swinging. This is I own this. This is for each one of us to go, do I have conflict in my life? Unresolved conflict? There's somewhere that I need to put this stuff to practice. We need to own it. We need to own the conversation we talked about last week. You're going to need to own. We're going to need to own the next weeks that we're going to talk about. I think it's so important that we own it and go, God, is there anything? And I'm going to tell you, there's one thing that will keep you from doing that. There might just be some stuff in the closet. For you to move ahead in this, maybe it's time to get some stuff out of that. Maybe it's time to get unforgiveness out of that closet. Maybe we have some stuff. Maybe we have some bitterness because of something. And when we have that bitterness, it's so hard for us to own it. Maybe we have to open that thing and say, I've got to get rid of this resentment. God, I need your help. I need to realize I have resentment, and I need to get it out of my closet so that I can move forward and resolve this conflict that's in my life. Take a hard look at your life and go, is there stuff that's hindering me from moving forward to resolving this conflict? Say, God, I need you. I need you, God. I can't do this on my own. We're going to end this series always with a question and then with a verse. And the question this week is, am I resolving conflicts in my relationships God's way? It's a question to ask yourself. Am I doing that? And then the verse we want to end with today is Psalms 119. It says, Lord, teach me. I love that because we need to be taught, don't we? We need to be taught, and who we're better to teach us. Lord, teach me the way of your statutes, and I will keep them to the end. Grant me insight that I may keep your law and observe it wholeheartedly. Guide me in the path of your commands, for in them is my delight. Bend my heart to your decrees and not to wrongful gain. What a verse. Go away from here with that question in that verse.